welcome, and thank you to everyone joining us today from across the country and around the world. I'm Michael Higgs, Virtual Program Manager here at Conscious Capitalism. And on behalf of the entire team, I want to thank you for joining us in community today. We are very excited to be sharing space with Arun Gupta. As many of you know, Conscious Capitalism is a global movement of CEOs, presidents, founders, board members, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders from diverse industries, backgrounds, and perspectives who are committed to the shared purpose of elevating humanity through business. We were founded in 2008 as a 501c3 to provide our community of active operating leaders a platform to share practical advice and tools on how our principles are integrated into different organizations and within various industries. Our community of conscious capitalists offers best practices and business strategies on how the philosophy is applied to create sustainable success within one's business, leading to systemic change and impact in the world. Several times a month, we offer virtual gatherings like this as a way for the community to come together and see how this philosophy takes shape in the leadership journeys and business practices of those in our network. Just a few housekeeping details. Today's session is going to run for about 45 minutes. Arun and I will be in conversation for about 25 to 30. And then we're going to go ahead and transition to audience questions for the last 10 to 15 minutes of our time together. I did open up the chat, but if you could kindly put your questions into the Q&A box, that's along the lower portion of your screen, that would be appreciated. Just it helps me to jump over to that feature to bring your questions to the conversation. So let's kick things off here. Rebuilding trust among business, government, and society might seem implausible, if not impossible to some. But to authors like Arun Gupta, Gerard George, and Thomas Fewer, it is the only way to tackle some of the critical issues of our time. In their book, Venture Meets Mission, drawing from their expertise gained from Silicon Valley to Washington, D.C., the authors illuminate how entrepreneurs and government officials alike can utilize established networks of innovation and venture capital from the private sector and policy-making methodologies of the public sector to unlock new forms of capitalism, one that leverages purpose and policy to sustain positive impact. In today's conversation, we're going to hear from Arun, and he's going to expand on why rebuilding trust between business, government, and society is critical to advancing purpose-driven innovation and detail the proposed framework that will guide leaders in this process. Through real-life examples of entrepreneurs who have successfully merged purpose and policy in this way, Arun's going to share how that happens. And you'll walk away from today's conversation with sort of an expanded perspective on the ways that we can use business to affect the lasting change and elevate humanity. Now, for a quick bio, Arun Gupta is a venture capitalist. He's a lecturer at Stanford University for a class called Value Meets Mission, and he's an adjunct entrepreneurship professor and senior advisor to provost at Georgetown University. He's a CEO of the Noble Reach Foundation, which is focused on catalyzing and inspiring a renewed spirit of national service through innovation. Arun is active in the emerging technology, entrepreneurship, public policy, and venture finance communities. He's passionate about inspiring students to pursue mission-oriented entrepreneurial careers and has committed to contribute all the proceeds from his book sales to the Noble Reach Foundation. As a partner at Columbia Capital, Arun's investment career spanned 18 years, including initiating the firm's cybersecurity and government technology investments with a focus on national security, AI, SaaS, and cloud infrastructure sectors. Prior to joining Columbia Capital in 2000, Arun was at the Carlyle Venture Partners focused on software investments. Prior to Carlyle, Arun held positions in Arthur D. Little's telecom and technology consulting practice and shared responsibility for establishing ADL's management consulting operations in Mumbai from 1995 to 98. Arun, welcome.
Thank you, Michael. Great to be here.
Absolutely. Well, delighted to have you join us today. And thank you to everyone. I see we've got some people joining us from Pennsylvania. We've got Austin, New York. Thank you all to joining us for today's conversation. Arun, I wanted to start off with some advance praise for your book. And this is Steve Blank. He's an entrepreneur and author of a book we've probably all heard of, The Lean Startup. And Steve says, I've launched 8 Silicon Valley tech companies, but I've never done work more personally rewarding than helping NSF, NIA, NIH, DoD, and other government agencies learn how to innovate rapidly. Venture meets mission shows you how you can make the biggest difference and have the most fulfilling years of your career by serving your country at the intersection of technology, innovation, venture capital, and government. And again, that's Steve Blank, entrepreneur and author of Lean Startup. To many people, Arun, we hear of Steve's success, in marrying entrepreneurship and government, but perhaps for many of us, there's a lack of trust in our institutions, right? And the first question I want to start with is, what are some of the specific perceptions of incompatibility between entrepreneurship and government that need to be addressed?
Yeah, so thank you, Michael, for having me again today. And we talk about this a bit in the book, because it's at the core. Stepping back and as to why it's important, and talking about the incompatibilities. The class I taught at Stanford called Valley Meets Mission, really what was trying to do was trying to, energize and inspire a crew with their entrepreneurial spirit and the platform of being in the Valley, but not using that or pointing that energy around Candy Crush 3.0, but let's go solve big problems, right? And we need your talent and your energy in the platform, and almost that you have a responsibility to be using it around bigger problems than Candy Crush 3.0. But in addition, to solve the biggest of those problems, right? Climate, cyber, national security, food insecurity, healthcare. It's going to require some level of collaboration with government to be able to scale, because these problems are too large for any one startup. And so really for us, it was about really, how do you kind of create this renewed partnership to go solve these big problems between government and entrepreneurs? So when you get into what's the incompatibility that exists, I think it's hard not to start at the risk reward, the incentive structure, and every ecosystem is really driven by what the incentive structure is. We try to write about this in the book, but the government incentive structure many times is about not making mistakes.
Mm.
And the fewer mistakes you make, and I have a quip in my class, and we talk about this in the book, where I say, as a VC, if I was measured like government, I'd never raise another fund. And in saying that, really what I'm getting at is that, as a VC, I can make 10 investments, and 7 of them could be, suboptimal, but then, 2 or 3 can really blow it out, right? And then my whole fund looked fantastic. And then I'm oversubscribed in my next fund. In government, I can make 10 investments, and 9 of them could be okay, but one of them may go south, and it could be Solyndra, and then you're carrying that with you for another decade around you, right? Even though the entire portfolio is still okay.
Mhm.
And so we provide a different heuristic around how we measure both, and that we shouldn't then be surprised that drives behavior. Mariana Mazzucato writes about this in some of her work. She talks about how government socializes risk, but we privatize rewards, right? So one's playing for downside and avoiding downside, and the other one's playing for upside. And that's
Right.
a very subtle and important difference with how you do anything, whether in how you work, how you play, if you're a football team, how you manage your career.
Certainly.
People playing to win are a different mindset. And so I think that's what we're trying to get at. And look, we're not saying like, hey, you just go change culture and got to change government. But we are trying to say is that, let's think about how we create a new partnership that harnesses both, and really the optimism that entrepreneurs bring, and then bring that with the scale of government. I'll give you another example. Dan Tangerlini, who's a good friend, he points out that, like, look, every government agency has an IG, an inspector general, right? And their job is to make sure that you follow the rules, you do what you're supposed to do. And you deviate, something goes off, you're concerned about being brought in front of a congressional hearing. And his answer to that, and he's kind of quip about it, is like, you need two IGs. And I go, like, two IGs, how's that help? And he goes, so the second one should be an innovation general. And the innovation general's job is to make sure you're innovating fast enough. So you're testing, you're trying new things, you're failing, but you're moving the ball forward faster than other organizations. And if you're not, you could be brought in front of a congressional hearing. And again, will that happen? No, but it's an interesting thought exercise, right? Around, like, how do you create the reward infrastructure for being right? And especially for civil servants, right? Politicians, I put them in a separate bucket. They'll have their own way of figuring that out. But for the civil servant, we need more of those positive stories, and it starts with storytelling, right? And which is a lot of what we try to do in the book. But reconciling that difference, I think entrepreneurs in the private sector, again, the system is more outcome focused.
Mm,
How you get there is almost less important than
right,
getting there,
right.
right? So you may start off with a thesis around what you need to do for product market fit, but then you find out, once you're trying to sell your product, that that's not the way that people want to buy it. And so then you adapt and you pivot. You may move through different channels. You may change how you brand your product, but you keep testing and learning, right? Until you find the thing that's working, and then you double down really hard, right?
Yeah.
Um, and and you're rewarded for it because people are measuring you on the outcome, right? They're not saying, like, all right, this is what you said you were going to do and you didn't do it. And so I think that's what we try to get at, and that's where some of the incompatibility exists.
Yeah, one of the things that you bring up in the book, in the society that we have here in America, with higher education, we have a remarkable ability to develop talent,
Yeah.
right? But one of the things that you highlight in the book is that there aren't a lot of pathways for people beginning their career now. There is the exception of Teach for America,
Yeah.
which is a highly coveted entry in your resume. Um, but essentially, government service and attracting that top talent to step in to serve the greater needs of the government. There aren't a lot of pathways that exist. And you, in the book, you sort of highlight some of the mindset challenges that the younger professionals might be having. Can you talk a little bit about um, what are those obstacles in connecting someone that's just beginning their career with government service? What are those
Yeah.
challenges that they face?
Yeah. So look, I think this is deeply ingrained even on our college campuses, and I think our academic universities have a role to play in this.
Mhm,
So the challenges are, a fewfold. One, I think, when I listen to students, right, um, you start with who's coming to campus,
mhm,
and you don't see government agencies showing up, right? They're
mhm.
not recruiting. They don't have the resources. They can't show up on all these campuses, and so if you're a student, you have to work a little extra hard to go find them, right? And then when you do try to, especially if you're in the STEM field or in the business field, it's unlikely that you have any faculty member, advisor, et cetera, that spent time in government. So now you've got, like, here you are, a student. You may be thinking, like, I'm an AI major, but I'd love to, try to do something with this in one of the agencies. You don't know who to turn to on your faculty side,
Sure.
right? You don't then when you go to the career fairs or go on campus, you'll see all the consulting firms, the banks, and the big tech firms. You don't see the agencies that you might be interested in. And so maybe you try to look online for job opportunities and you find yourself at USA Jobs. And
Mhm.
anyone that's ever gone there will tell you, it's like going to DOS, and these are kids that are living in an iPhone 15 world.
Right.
Right. And so and then your roommate walks in and says, "Hey, Arun, you want to go grab a free dinner at one of the consulting firms?" And you find yourself, you go for the free dinner and food, and next thing you know, you're applying, you're interviewing, and then you've got an offer.
Mm-hmm.
And so the easy button kicks in,
Yeah.
right? And that's a lot of it, right? It is just showing up and making it easy. I think the second piece, though, is the words you use matter.
Mm-hmm.
I think, look, government sells careers, right? And I think students are buying experiences, right?
Right.
So when you say like, hey, come, this is a 30-year career with us, and here's what you can go do, that falls on deaf ears. And that's got nothing to do only with government. Like, think about it. If the consulting firms and the banks sold that way, they would lose out. What they sell is, hey, come do a 2-year program with us, and then you can go do whatever you want,
Sure.
right?
Sure.
So if you even think about how the big firms do it, they actually break it down. And they say it's just a 2-year experience, which is much more manageable for, I think, this generation. I think the other piece is that the government sells jobs. Like, you can be a data analyst at this agency, right? But the kids really want mission right now.
Right.
So saying you're a data analyst doesn't inspire anyone. But if that same job is using geospatial information to rebuild food networks in Ukraine, like, that's exciting,
Yeah.
right?
Indeed.
And so I think if you can change it from selling careers and jobs and move it to selling experiences and mission, um, and then here's where I think a not-for-profit or some party that sits outside of government can help government coordinate talent for government, right? And I think that's a lot of what Teach for America has been able to do really well. Not because government isn't smart enough, capable, and things of that sort, but there are structural limitations,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, how you recruit on campus is very different. But as, for a not-for-profit, you can recruit in a more way that the students are accustomed to. Where you place students after you do the program is important,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because the incoming students want to know where did that batch of students go?
Right. Right.
And so that's, a lot of this came to us, as we were unpacking this, Michael. I had 2 CS students, both female, both, just badass. One was selected to do a program called Kessel Run, which is a military program, software factory, very prestigious. She tells her friend she's going to go do that, and her friends go, "Why would you go to government? Like, why would you go to government when you can do anything else in the Valley?" The other one was selected to do Teach for America,
Mm-hmm.
and her friends go, "Wow, that's amazing. You're going to serve, you're going to give back, and then you can go do whatever you want." And when you think about it, it's that paradoxical juxtaposition that we're really trying to get at, which is both are very capable, both are STEM, both are tech oriented, both are trying to serve. One is actually going into government and is getting a quizzical why look, and the other one isn't. And it's also serving and it's getting a wow reaction. And so we actually use that as a little bit of a rallying cry of how do we shift why to wow, and making so that, like, if we're successful in 5 years,
Mm-hmm.
students saying that they're starting their career in government should get a wow reaction. You got selected to do that,
Yep.
right? Because as much as we want to say as adults it shouldn't matter, it matters. It just, how your peers react to what you do and say matters. And so we have to make it feel and be prestigious in that way, and have it also be viewed as a career enhancer,
Mm-hmm.
right? Something that they can go do this, and they know when they come out, like it, like you referred earlier, it means something.
Yeah.
People recognize it, and that, whether it be grad school, staying in government, or going outside, it says something about you, and it says something about your civic North Star.
Yeah. I think we talk a lot about higher purpose here at Conscious
Yeah,
Capitalism.
and you guys do a great job.
Thank you. I know we have a lot of conscious leaders on the call with us today. So the notion of, higher purpose and our specifically elevating humanity through business, I think we're in a cohort of people who have thought about purpose a lot. Um, I think that the pandemic got a lot more of the general population thinking about
Yes.
higher purpose, what they want to do with their career, where do they want to live, perhaps what life they might be able to imagine in 5 to 10 years. Um, when you make the point in the book that what we really need to find alignment for this venture meets mission ecosystem to truly work is purpose, right? People and profit. Um, and the purpose of the some of the very ambitious goals of the government aligned very nicely with a lot of the talent. But I guess what I'm trying to get at is how might we think about the purpose of the government and the call to action that we all feel as people to serve our higher purpose?
Yeah, I mean, so like in the book we say, start with what motivates you, right,
Mhm.
and what you care about, right? And the beauty of what the government provides is that there's some agency, there's some entity inside that's addressing that or
Yeah,
trying to. If climate's your thing, if healthcare is your thing, if space is your thing, if national security is your thing, if food's your thing. So I think the initial work that needs to really happen with like what really motivates you individually. What do you feel real passionate about? And what we're trying to highlight, and look, I think this is a real structural change over the last 8 to 10 years, honestly, Michael, is that the amount of capital that's now flowing in to mobilize around people, purpose, and profit is like never before,
right,
right? And so therefore, if you can then identify what is it that you really care about and work about, there probably are startups, there are probably, investors, there are folks working around those edges to try to address some of those problems. And that would be where I would go spending, I have two kids in college and, plenty of students that I interact with. And that's where I was like, this is where I'd spend the next 2 decades, right? Like this is the ecosystem.
right,
'Cause it's only going to grow.
right,
And we're at the very early innings of the money starting to come into the ecosystem. And that's primarily because we're at the early innings of seeing real big winners.
right.
Uh, whether it be a SpaceX, a Ginkgo Bioworks, Commonwealth Fusion, a Palantir, you're seeing big companies getting formed. And that then enables investors to say, oh, there's financial return here to be made.
Sure.
And this is different than just hey, we're going to go do our business, but then on the side we'll say we're doing good. This is deeply integrated into the mission of what your business is,
Yeah,
right? So
absolutely.
your business is about solving larger social problems in a for-profit way, though.
Yes.
And I think that's important because I think we've created an artificial binary construct in our vernacular where we make one seem, we say for-profit, not for profit. We say private sector, public sector. We say one is implicitly about making money, and the other one's implicitly about doing good.
Right.
But we make it seem like an artificial choice, especially for kids coming out of school, because I would see these kids in my office hours struggling with this kind of, I really want to go do something good, but I really need to make some money.
Mhm.
And they feel guilty about both of those feelings. And you're like, but you don't have to choose.
Right.
There's plenty of things out there today where you can kind of go do both. And the thing, Michael, is, and this is what part of the motivation of writing the book was to get these stories out there because a lot of these companies don't come to campus, right? They don't recruit. And just because startups, have trouble having resources to show up on campus and recruit, but we need some way to make students aware that these opportunities exist. And that's a lot of what we were trying to do with the book and why we think this is as a great a time as any to be able to bring these things together. And I actually think, look, this is the superpower of our country, right? In a liberal democracy is our ability to create talent like anywhere else in the world.
Yeah.
We're still orders of magnitude ahead of anywhere else in the world, and our ability to innovate with our entrepreneurial ecosystem, we're orders of magnitude anywhere else in the world. And the evidence around that is that this is the place that most people, around the world come to do both.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
if you want to start a company or if you want to come and get a higher ed degree, you come to the US. What we need to start looking to do is how do we kind of align those and connect those around our larger social ambitions so that we are starting to flow the best talent and the best innovation to go solve those problems. And in great power competition, I think that's Those are real strategic differentiators as a country. And that's what we try to highlight.
Yeah, so I think for the benefit of the group, you and I were chatting before the start of the call, mentioning some companies that have successfully addressed some of the national security needs. But Arun, you've been living and investing in companies in Silicon Valley, where the intersection of need and venture funding meet. Can you highlight a couple stories uh, that you've seen firsthand? I know we were talking about Palantir and Andeville, but maybe just for the benefit of the group, a couple other stories where you're seeing this um, connection between great public need and the private sector.
Yeah, I mean, look, and some of this starts, the interesting part is that many times people feel like you can't be solving something socially, a social problem in a for-profit way, right? And so an interesting story I find is the folks at Commonwealth Fusion, and, we're chatting with the founder, and, it was a research project at a university, and then the funding got cut. Here they are trying to, really come up with, energy sources, to address many of our climate issues. And then they go look for funding. And they think like, all right, we're a research project. Let's go the not-for-profit route and look for funding. And they realize very quickly, while there's funding there on the not-for-profit side, there's not enough there to scale to the size of the problem, right? Um, you know, a few $1 million here or there is great, but it's not going to get you to what you really need to, to really solve the problem that they're trying to go after. And they realized that the only way to do that was to become a for-profit entity. And in doing so, once they did that, they were able to bring on, meaningful investors. And to date, raised hundreds of millions of dollars, and are on the forefront of, one of the leading companies right now around SMRs. And I think it's a great example of how we work. You look at SpaceX and the stories around that. I mean, what we tried to highlight with the SpaceX story was that it's really a government story, right? That's government funding. Like, again, back to socializing risks, but privatizing reward. Like, we all think about it as being, it is a successful and the most valuable private enterprise in the world today. Having said that, like, its initial start was with meaningful government funding that was focused on outcomes. If you can hit outcome A, you will receive X amount of funding. Anyone can go do it. And then we'll keep moving forward to kind of, rebuild our space launch, infrastructure system here. And, so we're capable of doing it. We did it, during the vaccines, with what we did, and in providing outcome-based incentives.
Absolutely. In
But
18 months, right?
yeah. And
Yeah.
so what's interesting is that our nation has the capability. Crisis is usually the time that we evoke it. And so the question we tried to, I mean, the frame for the book was like, this isn't about like, should we do it or can we do it? With more, hey, we are doing it.
Yeah.
But the question really is, how do we do more of it? And how do we make it the norm and not the exception?
Yeah.
Right. And I think the way you make it the norm and not the exception is that you have to acknowledge it's a different mindset. Um, one where you have to be able to accept that sometimes it won't work, right? And that's part of taking bets.
Yeah.
And that's part of trying to innovate. And one is a planning mindset and one is an innovation mindset. And an innovation mindset means you have to constantly be testing and learning. And that's what we try to talk about.
I want to sprinkle in a few questions that have come in.
Sure.
The first one is from Linda, and apologies if I mispronounced that. The question is, do you see an opportunity for AmeriCorps or the Vista programs to bridge the gaps? Um, uh, and the question is, how can we make differences in healthcare, hunger relief, etc.? with that sort of venture meets mission model that you describe in the ecosystem.
Yeah, no, look, I think when I think of AmeriCorps, I think more about focusing on the education system, right? And going in on the education side. I think what we're trying to really focus on as we think about the mission ecosystem is identify a problem set that you're looking to go solve, but then think about kind of what are for-profit sustainable ways to kind of go solve those problems, right?
Mhm.
If it's about food insecurity, is there a way, especially with all the revolution that's going on in bio right now, to be, manufacturing food sources, right, at a cost price level, yet without having to sacrifice nutrition, in a way that you can, go solve that,
Mhm.
right? As opposed to, raising grant funding to feed people, right? Like, how do we get to the core problem, right? Because I think those are the sustainable ways that we solve this, that also take advantage of the innovation piece in our economy.
Certainly. Um, yeah, Greg has a question just about the easy button that you referred to
Yeah, yeah.
for college students. Have you seen any introduction of venture exposure and mission alignment in primary education, high school, or
Look, we probably should spend more time there. We haven't spent as much time there as we could. Um, Having said that, look, we are seeing more high schools starting to incorporate the idea of entrepreneurship in the curriculum, offering it. Obviously you've got junior achievement and programs like that have been around for decades. Again, trying to promote students to think about being entrepreneurial. And we just need more of it, right?
yeah.
And I think you hate to say it, but even shows like Shark Tank, right? Kind of put it in the ethos. Is that what really entrepreneurship is? Probably not. Having said that, at least puts it in the ethos of students thinking about how do you think about business? Is that a good idea? What do you do? And things of that sort.
Um, I want to give you an opportunity, Arun, to speak about your organization, the Noble Reach Foundation, and just educate our audience about what your work is designed
Sure.
to do
No,
and the
thank you for that.
yeah
Michael,
need.
as you and I were chatting, when we were writing the book, um, um, we, I was on the board of a not-for-profit, and we'd gone through a process whereby, we had about a $500 million endowment, and started thinking about what do we do with, the direction for the not-for-profit. And in doing that, with the board, it just was serendipity that I was having worked on. I was working on the book at the time, and so I thought a lot of those ideas would be timely with the foundation to kind of go put that to work. So what does that mean? So we have a $500 million endowment now at Noble Reach. What we're looking to do is we start with the overarching thesis that we're going to do two things right in this country: in great power competition. We've got to get better talent around government and better innovation around government. We talk about what we're doing as helping modernize the infrastructure to do that,
Mhm.
along two dimensions. So, connecting better talent, or top talent to government, and our innovation into government, but also building the scaffolding to support them. So on the talent side, what does that mean? We're launching a program, starting, later this week, on college campuses, where we'll be recruiting our first cohort of students to go into government agencies and do 1 or 2 year fellowships. And we were able to bring on board the former executive director of the PIF program, the Presidential Innovation Fellows Program, to come join us and lead that effort to help scale it. And we're looking to scale that in a meaningful way. So again, back to the why to wow discussion, if we're successful there, everything that we have is with the mindset of how do we scale. We want to start off with 25 students, so we can test and pilot, but then the idea is to, grow that and get to hundreds and larger. And try to create more of a movement whereby it's in the ethos that this is a place to start your career, and it's a generationally, it can mean a lot to opening up the aperture of career opportunities for you. The second is on the second career talent side. So, even folks like myself or others that have, had fruitful first careers in the private sector, how do you kind of create a community of them that may want to engage on public sector problems and put their talents to work, but may not be wanting to go into government
Right.
directly? And so we have a fellows program that we've launched, and we currently have 10 emerge fellows. These are folks that have started, built companies, been venture investors that are now helping us commercialize tech out of DARPA and NSF. So that's the talent piece. On the innovation side, we're working closely with research institutes inside of DARPA and NSF today to help commercialize tech, where they identify research of national importance, researchers doing that research, and then we, manage a program where we were able to connect them to entrepreneurs and help commercialize that tech. And we've now done about 70 of these over 2.5 years, raised over 1.3 billion, and had probably $300 to $400 million of acquisitions. And in this process, we're taking no equity. We're just facilitating this.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's our way of saying that this is how we can start to really, help catalyze that innovation ecosystem. And then the final piece is, as we're working closely with academic institutions on the recruiting side, we're also looking at how we can kind of help with more curriculum development, so that we can be educating students and having them just be in the ethos.
Sure.
We're collaborating with Purdue right now to create the first of its kind engineering for public service certificate, um, and which we could then take to other universities as well. We're collaborating with the professors at Princeton about creating curriculum around the book. With folks at Stanford around case studies and the work that they're doing around hacking for defense. But a lot of this is around, again, how do we start to build systemic change, so that the right incentive systems are in place and that there's social goodwill, so that when the student says they're going to go do this, people are going like, wow, you were selected to go do this, right? Like there's a prestige, there's a respect around it that's conditioned into the system.
Just because you are on sort of the cutting edge of what the government needs are, in some of the agencies that you referenced having partnerships with. What are those fast-paced growing areas for impact for government venture partnership and arrangements?
Yeah, look, I think, the most obvious one that one can point to is what's happening in AI right now. You look at the AI executive order passed, the idea of getting more, what a lot of this is what people lose sight of is when they think about the technology that's fast paced, the missing link is really the talent, right? And so how do you get the talent inside these agencies to be able to assess how do you use the tech appropriately? Who to be partnering with appropriately? How do you partner?
Mm-hmm.
And then on the policy side, if you're going to regulate something, you need to at least be knowledgeable on what the unintended consequences of what your regulations can be, and having depth around that. And so, I think AI, obviously, I think there's a lot going on in bio right now.
Mm-hmm.
We saw obviously COVID woke everyone up around kind of what, biosecurity could look like, and the dangers, and how we address that in a meaningful way. I think the confluence of AI with bio is bringing down, the costs and accelerating the experimentation that can be done. So the kinds of breakthroughs that we may start to see over the next, 2 to 5 years could be very exciting as well. And I think those are areas that you're seeing a lot of energy around. Space. If you're looking at national security as a new frontier, and all the infrastructure that goes in place there, and how battles are fought and national security has taken place, and things of that sort. I think there's a lot of excitement and a lot of energy around that, and how do you collaborate in a more meaningful way.
Mhm.
Um, and you can go down the list. I mean, obviously, climate's huge with what's going on with the IRA and the funding. You look at the work that's being done in the Department of Energy and the LPO program, led by Jigar Shah in the funds about trying to catalyze entrepreneurs, to help solve these problems at scale. And I think, look, I think the government's gearing up for this, right? You look at the CHIPS Act, again, how do we kind of, provide the incentives to rebuild and bring national security and economic security together, right? And rebuild our manufacturing capacity while also protecting our economic resiliency, supply chain resiliency in a meaningful way, right? Um, I mean, those are um, a few that been spending a decent amount of time on, but there's so many more coming down the pike that everyone people are thinking about. Cyber and quantum and things of that sort as well.
Yeah, I thought your book did a fantastic job of just illuminating for me all of the various challenges that the US government puts forth. I think there's actually a website, challenges.gov,
Yeah,
which you can filter by different government agency and what their specific needs might be. Um, one final question I had for
sure.
you was, when let's take it back to leadership. What are those leadership qualities or attributes from the private sector that you think would contribute most to cultivating this ecosystem that you describe of venture meeting mission?
Yeah, I mean, from the private sector, look, I think the leadership quality I would point to is probably one of servant leadership,
Mm,
right? One where you're leading by example, one where you're sharing the credit, one where there's deep customer empathy. And I say that because and we try to talk about this a little bit in the book, and you hit on this, Michael, with the original question around, why are these ecosystems in conflict? It's deeply cultural, right? And Amy Ziegart writes about, like the hoodies versus the suits culture, right? And it's a different way of thinking about the world. And but with that, still needs to come, while there's this level of zest and innovation and enthusiasm, a level of respect, right? A level of empathy of how the constraints around that you're maybe working through, but also the sense of like, maybe we haven't figured it all out, or maybe these folks actually do know more than we give them credit for, right? And how you collaborate in that ecosystem. And and this is why we even talk about government being a first career place is can only be helpful, is that it provides you that shared vernacular, right? It provides you that shared experience. It provides you that empathy, because you've experienced it. You've been around these folks, right? And I think that's the long game in what we're trying to do with Noble Reach and what we're trying to do with Scholars Program, et cetera, is that the long game is how you rebuild trust. I think while we've done a lot really well, we've also had decades now of culture where people, if you go in the private sector, you stay in the private sector. If you go into academia, you stay in academia. And if you go to government, you stay in government. And, never the two shall meet. And then, you just kind of drift. And it's easy to, amplify this with sound bites on Twitter or, your social media platforms where, you don't spend more than, 140 characters to kind of, make a point. And you're able to just reinforce, stereotypes without really being able to really unpack what it means, right? Like, we have a whole chapter on like humanizing government and personalizing entrepreneurship, right? Like entrepreneurs aren't all, you know, billionaires that are, and that, many would classify as being socially extractive, right? It's a value system.
Mhm. Indeed.
And then arguably that we're all entrepreneurs, right? Like raising a family is an entrepreneurial activity.
Yes.
And so it's a mindset, right? And so you can't say it's bad to be an entrepreneur. And likewise, saying bad is to be government, right? It's like, what is government to you, right? Break it down to its molecular level. It's a bunch of agencies and it's a bunch of people. 99% of those people are civil servants. They're not politicians, first of all,
Right.
right? And they're actually going to work each day trying to do the best they can, right? And they have a North Star. And you know, until we can bring down that heat, you can't rebuild these relationships. But I think that's the long game, right? Of like how you rebuild trust. And in the, you know, ultimately trust is about people. And so we just need to kind of get you know, more of that interaction taking place.
Indeed. I do want to encourage everyone, Arun's book, again, Venture Meets Mission. You It's a wonderful playbook, Arun. I highly enjoyed the book. As I shared with you before, I come from a family who spent 30 years in government service and have been in the Bay Area surrounded by technology for much of my adult life. So you do a beautiful job articulating what is the problem, what are the key opportunities, and how do we create this cross-pollination between different segments of society, the entrepreneurs, the venture world, and government. I'm going to just drop a quick survey link into the chat. It does inform our future programming. So please take a moment to fill that out. Again, I want to encourage everyone to visit noblereachfoundation.org. I'm just going to quickly drop that back into the chat for some that might have missed it. This is Arun's foundation. Doing remarkable work. Arun, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. And a big thank you to everyone that joined us on today's call. We will be making a recording available with a follow-up to a link to purchase Arun's book. And again, just gratitude for all who joined. And Arun, personal thank you to you. Thanks for being here this afternoon.
Michael, thank you for having me, and thank you for all that Conscious Capitalism does.
Thanks again.
Take care.